Welcome everyone. My name is Gina Heathcote and I'm a Professor of Gender Studies and International Law at the School of Law, SOAS, University of London. But you don't want to hear about me because it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the launch today of Dr. Emily Jones' groundbreaking new book, Feminist Theory and International Law. This is what it looks like if you haven't got your hands on it already. Posthuman Perspectives. We have an absolutely superb panel, thanks Rosie, also showing the book, who will respond to the book, and I'm going to introduce each of our panelists in due course. Couple of housekeeping notes. As you've already worked out, the chat function is working and we welcome your messages and comments, which I collate at the end and share with Emily. She can see them now as well. I think we can just see it as the kind of hug space and champagne clinking if we were all together in the same city at this moment in person. In addition to that, there's a Q&A box for questions, which if we have time at the end, we're happy to answer questions, or the panel will answer questions. If you don't want to be identified in your question, please use the anonymous function when you enter your question. Yeah, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time of that for that at the end. But first of all, before I introduce our panelists, I want to say to Emily my thanks for writing this book and for having me as part of that journey, as well as the thesis beforehand, which along the way, quite a lot of resilience and perseverance to follow up on an idea and to take it to its completion. Along the way, also teaching me, where the teacher becomes the taught, I guess, questioning everything, and for always building communities around us and with us together has been a huge blessing. I wanted to invite you to say a few words to open the evening, to tell us a little bit about the book, Feminist Theory and International Law, Posthuman Perspectives. And before you do that, to introduce you to everyone, just in case somebody out there doesn't know, Dr. Emily Jones is a holder of prestigious New Act Fellowship at Newcastle University. Dr. Jones is a feminist scholar whose international legal scholarship spans the study of military technology, rights of nature, deep sea mining and environmental law, and is infused by her knowledge of post-human feminisms as well as queer and feminist legal theories. Emily, over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Gina, for being here to chair my event today. And thank you also to Diane, to Liz, to Patricia, to Rosie for being here. I've got my dream team of panelists here today. And also to my audience. We've got so many people here and we're getting a lot of love in the chat, which is really nice to see. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I don't want to take up too much time because I want to hear from our panelists, of course, and I'm quite intrigued to find out what they think about the book, because some of them I know a little bit, some of them they haven't said too much. But I wanted to just do a brief introduction to the book and what it's about and how it kind of started off, to just give you all a bit of a sense of where this came from. So this book, as Gina suggested, started off as my PhD thesis. And I came to Gina, who of course was my supervisor, with a project that sought to rethink the structure of international law and the knowledge project that underlies international law using feminist theory. And so that idea really came from my frustration, both in my master's degree originally, but also from working in women's rights in various capacities, with the way the law was and just inherently is set up around male needs and knowledge. At the same time, we had more and more books being published on women's rights, which was really fabulous to see. But I had a sense that some of the ideas that was in some of the foundational feminist work, and particularly Hilary Charlesworth and Christine Chinkin's work on feminist approaches to international law, work that really moved beyond an analysis of how international law could intervene in women's lives, but actually also analyze core concepts in international law, such as the state or sources or treaties. I had a feeling that that was being left behind in the kind of momentum we were seeing around women's rights. And of course, there have always been people doing this work. It's not like, Charlesworth and Chinkin had their kind of work and then it got left behind entirely. I mean, many of the people on the screen today have been doing that work for a long time, including particularly Gina and Di, but also people such as Ratna Kapoor, Karen Knopf, Anne Orford, Eureka Otomo. But these voices were less central in the kind of feminism and international law debate, where the focus really had come to this at this point to be more on kind of women's rights, women's participation. And of course, that work is really important. I use it throughout the book. But at the same time, I had a sense that we needed to retain that focus on those core issues of international law. And that was necessary because feminist approaches were coming to be seen as a kind of women's issue. You know, it's kind of about this niche thing that we only focus on and it's only about women. And I wanted to kind of disrupt that and say, actually, no, like feminist theory can analyze all of international law, and all of you international lawyers should be taking note of what feminist theory has to say. So that's where I kind of started. It turns out I chose, of course, the best supervisor possible, Gina, who encouraged me to be very fearless and think in new ways, which I really kind of appreciate, because I don't think every supervisor would have been as generous in allowing me to do that. And then, so in the first year of my PhD, I attended Rosie's summer school. We didn't know each other at all then, and I was very shy and I sat in the back. But until then, I'd be reading feminist psychoanalysis, post-colonial feminisms, queer theory, and I attended Rosie's summer school because of her amazing work on feminism. But through that summer school and through Rosie, I really then discovered posthumanism and posthuman feminism, and that just kind of changed the whole journey for me. And of course, that connection to Rosie's work has remained, and her work greatly informs this book as well, particularly her latest book, Posthuman Feminism, of course, which is the key text really in that field. So from there, I finished my PhD and I transformed it quite a bit into this book. And so that's really the starting point of this book, the idea that feminist approaches to international law have been mischaracterized by the mainstream of the discipline as being a niche field that pertains only to women's lived experiences and their participation in decision-making processes. And so given this, the book seeks to exemplify how feminist approaches can be used to analyze all areas of international law, using posthuman feminism to do so. Now, posthuman feminism is also not an easy term and one that you might necessarily have heard of, so I wanted to briefly define that as well. There are lots of forms of posthuman theory, which is now a fairly well-established field, but posthuman feminism is distinct in its focus on intersectionality and inequality. And I therefore define posthuman feminism in the book as a theory that seeks to dismantle exclusionary humanist hierarchies between humans, so gender, race, class, while also rethinking the anthropocentric idea that humans sit in hierarchy over non-human subjects, such as the environment, non-human animals, technological subjects. And so this book, with that definition in mind, uses posthuman feminism to analyze various topics in international law that seemingly have little to do with women's lived experiences or participation, including the regulation of new and emerging military technologies, international environmental law, and the conceptualization of the sovereign state and other modes of legal personality. And so the book really seeks to showcase how feminist theory, here posthuman feminism, can be used to analyse all areas of international law. The other main aim of the book, however, speaks back a little bit more to posthuman theory, which is primarily a body of scholarship that sits within the humanities. And while there are some that are applying posthuman theory, I think the kind of best examples here are art practitioners and people working on pedagogies. For the most part, posthuman theory remains very theoretical. So the second core aim of this book was to show how posthuman theory can be used in practice. And I try and use it to design and call for legal change. So the book is very theoretical, but I also make some more concrete proposals for legal change in it, and particularly in chapter 3, where I talk about military technologies and artificial intelligence. But anyway, that is probably enough from me. It's a brief summary of the book and how I came to write it. I don't want to take up any more time because I want to hear from our panelists, but just to say thank you so much to all of these people who have all supported my work in various ways over the years, and thank you to all of you in the audience as well for being part of that journey. So yeah, when you're ready, over to the speakers.
Thanks, Emily. That's a wonderful introduction to the book, and if people haven't read it, I encourage you to get your hands on it and read it. It's it's been such a pleasure to come back to the ideas that we talked about so long ago in supervision, and now see them in the book. They're very powerful. And also, I think, really powerful to see other scholars' work in conversation with yours, those on the panel today, but many of our audience members as well, which I think is a really lovely kind of space of conversation. So my job now, though, is to introduce our panelists for today, who are all come to us as readers of Emily's book, and to talk as readers responding to it. So each panelist is going to talk for somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, and I'm going to just begin by introducing all of them in one big batch. So for our first responder or reader is Professor Diane Otto, who had the role of the inaugural, I think, Di, if I'm correct, and now former Francine V. McNiff Chair in Human Rights Law at the University of Melbourne, and now since formally retiring, although we all know she's still working really, in 2006, is a professorial fellow at the Melbourne Law School. Di's research marks the entry point for so many of us to think differently across the fields of human rights, gender and sexuality, international peace and security law, people's tribunals, and domestic implementation of international legal obligations. Di is widely published, far too many things for me to tell you about all of them here, but publications include the 3 edited volumes of Gender Issues in Human Rights, an entry on feminist approaches in the Oxford Bibliography Online, and the wonderful edited collection, Querying International Law. Probably most of you have a favorite Di piece, whether it's Signs of Weakness on Security Council Resolution 1325, perhaps her work on the Yogyakarta Principles, Querying International Law gets a second plug, or her scholarly reflections on her response to her role as one of the members of the expert panel on the Asia Pacific Regional Women's Hearings on Gender-Based Violence. My own favourite piece is a lesser known piece titled Integrating Questions of Gender into Discussions of the Use of Force, published in 1995, and a crucial signpost to my own research that allowed me to think differently about the international law and the use of force. Thank you, Di, for joining us here today in the very early hours of a Melbourne morning. Your intellectual contribution to feminist and queer scholarship on international law is deeply embedded in the very possibility, I think, of this book's existence. Di's intervention will be followed by Dr. Liz Kulamadayil's intervention or reading notes. Liz is an international lawyer and research associate at the Geneva Graduate Institute for Global Governance and Global Governance Center. Liz works on questions of extractivism, development, environmental justice, as well as the sociology of the profession, legal pedagogy, and knowledge production. Liz is published widely, but I encourage you to look for her work in the London Review of International Law, the Journal of the History of International Law, and Transnational Legal Theory. And thank you, Emily, for bringing me to Liz's work, which I really enjoyed reading and getting to know. After Liz, Dr. Patricia Palacios Zuloaga is a lecturer in international human rights law at the University of Essex. Patricia is a Chilean lawyer and specialist in the study of the international American human rights legal system, women's rights, and human rights of queer people. Patricia's recent research challenges understandings of compliance as impact in the inter-American human rights system, and suggests strategic pathways to decriminalization of abortion in Latin America. Patricia's work also examines how consent is taught in law schools. As Emily's former colleague at Essex, she misses her greatly, but like us all, I think is thrilled to see Emily in her thrive in her new role at Newcastle University. After Patricia, our final speaker, Professor Rosie Braidotti, is a feminist continental philosopher and distinguished university professor emerita at Utrecht University. Rosie is a fellow of the Australian Academy of Humanities and a member of Academic Europea. In 2022, many accolades. Oh, she left just as I started talking about her. But there are so many accolades that Rosie has acquired over her career. But I'll just mention one. In 2022, she received the Humboldt Research Award for lifelong contribution to scholarship. Nice to see you back, Rosie. Sorry, you missed my words. With too many publications to mention, Rosie's intellectual contribution pivots around three focal points: contemporary subjectivity, feminist theories, and the posthuman convergence. If you haven't read them, I suggest you might start with Rosie's 2011 books, Nomadic Subjects and Nomadic Theory, or her recent trilogy, The Posthuman, published in 2013, Posthuman Knowledge in 2019, and more recently, Posthuman Feminism in 2022. All my students that are here, it's on their reading lists anyway. And all of these make excellent entry points into Rosie's wonderful scholarship for new readers. My own entry into reading an introduction to Rosie's writing was a short piece written in 1992 titled The Exile, the Nomad and the Migrant, Reflections on International Feminism. I think it was through a footnote in Christine Chinkin and Hilary Charlesworth's book that led me to read that. So lovely stories and dialogues of how we come to conversations first in our readings. When I revisit The Exile, the Nomad and the Migrant, it seems as relevant today as when it was written in 1992. Rosie also recently edited, together with Emily and Goda Columbite, the More Posthuman Glossary, which is also by my bedside at the moment and favourite thing to read. Rosie, thank you so much for joining the conversation today, and we look forward to your comments. But first of all, Di, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm speaking from Naarm, also known as Melbourne, which is on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kula Nation, which has never been ceded, and I would like to respectfully acknowledge their elders past and present. I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm especially delighted to be described as one of Emily's dream team. I'm not sure that I'm on anyone else's dream team, maybe Joan's, but it's lovely, lovely to be here with everyone, and especially the other members of the dream team, and most especially with you, Emily. For me, Emily's book is a call for action. It's a beautifully crafted, seriously challenging call to action, urgent action. Action to reverse the perilous situation that we humans, together with life in its many other forms, are now facing. The plan of action that Emily proposes is two-pronged, as she's already really said. The first is analytical, calling for recomposing international law's lethal orthodoxies by developing a different kind of law that can better rise to the challenges of the present, while the second is to put this new life-sustaining law into action. These actions challenge us to renew our efforts to create alternative legal imaginaries and to live our lives in international law very differently. To guide these actions, Emily provides a set of navigational tools that draw from a vertiginous array of interdisciplinary knowledge, amazing, Emily, but primarily from posthuman feminist theory, as you've heard and as you can see from the title. As Emily says in the introduction, for me, focusing on the recasting of the human, non-human relations and thinking about agency differently provides both a theoretical starting point as well as potentially a model for rethinking how international lawyers do international law. Utilising these tools, Emily navigates the reader beyond now familiar feminist thinking and practices in international law in new and ambitious directions, foreshadowed by the beautiful corals on her cover, opening hopeful new world-making possibilities. So let me take one example of how I'm seriously challenged by this book. Since first stumbling on the words and ideas that I needed to begin to express my feminism in the early 1970s, I've been deeply wary of nature as providing any explanation for gender differences, and in particular, of course, for male domination. Similarly, nature has been used to normalise other long-standing and often lethal human hierarchies of race, class, ability, sexuality, and of course, civilizational status. These hierarchies are deeply embedded in international law. With the adoption of the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in 1966 and CEDAW in 1979, it was internationally agreed that nature did not hierarchize humans, rather that nurture or culture was responsible, and it followed that these hierarchies could and must be dismantled. We were not trapped in biological determinism. But a crucial aspect of Emily's project of decentering the human subject in international environmental law is to recast nature in all its many forms as having subjectivity, as agential, as acting alongside and together with and against human agency. To develop the idea of nature's subjectivity, Emily turns to queer theory that builds on the idea that queer people continue to be variously conceived as unnatural or non-human. Some of these scholars link their queerness with the non-human or inhuman as a positive connection, which provides a starting point, a site of knowledge that Emily suggests might aid the reconfiguration of the non-human in international environmental law. As she provokingly explains, and you have to think about this, legal discourse needs to note the interconnections between naturalised non-humans and dehumanised humans. In her navigation towards recognising subjectivity of the environment, Emily proposes productive links between the queer subject as other and the already othered non-human subject. Okay, so what's happening here with my feminist resistance to attributing any agency to nature? I'm being urged to think of nature outside the frames of binary essentialisms and immutability, and instead to think of it as responsive to change, as an agent of change. The most obvious example being climate change. This shift in thinking brings to the fore questions of relations between humans and non-humans, rather than, as in the earlier feminist imagination, the anthropocentric question of the human's own nature or materiality and its relationship with human culture, important as that question continues to be. So having led this feminist queer reader to think about nature as a subject, rather than as an object that can be used by other humans as an excuse for discrimination, how might this look in legal practice? Emily turns to the emerging field of the rights of nature, which started as a movement led by Indigenous peoples whose laws understand humans as an inherent part of nature, who hold responsibilities to care for nature. To the Western legal imagination, this can be translated into nature having rights, although much is lost in translation. Nevertheless, Emily offers this as perhaps a starting point for acknowledging the entanglements or interconnectedness of humans, non-humans, and what we have called the environment. On the other hand, the efforts of queer people to be recognised as fully human by claiming human rights has taught us that this method of inclusion requires capitulation to the prevailing heteronormative paradigm. It is a warning that the recognition of rights of nature risks merely greenwashing laws that remain anthropocentric. So seeking rights without at the same time fostering a wider shift in the hierarchical legal paradigms of anthropocentrism will really not change much at all. And this is the challenge that Emily presents. Her wonderful book provides a way for us to find each other and work together for a different world, a different international law that shifts the planet from a paradigm of life-threatening domination and hierarchy to one of life-sustaining shared connection with multiple others. That's what I have to say. So now I'm passing on to Liz.
Wonderful. Thank you for getting us started. I am also just incredibly delighted to be here and really humbled to have been asked to comment on this book. So as many of you know, Emily Jones is an exceptionally generous and curiosity-driven scholar. Two traits which she masterfully translated into her first monograph. Feminist theory and international law is generous because despite its own clearly marked sensitivities, the book is very, very generous and careful in its engagement with other perspectives. Feminist theory and international law is curiosity-driven because its achievement of proposing a genuinely new way of thinking about well-established doctrinal and conceptual problems of international law requires not only imagination and creativity, but also a thorough engagement with existing theory and doctrine. The book is the first to apply post-human feminist perspectives to the study of international law. And it does so by using the regulation of military technologies and nature as case studies. Doing so exposes, as Emily told us, international law's humanist and anthropocentric biases. Its objective is not only to challenge and make visible those biases, but also, as you told us, to rebut certain mischaracterizations of the value of feminist approaches to international law. So as you said, feminist theory in recent years has often been reduced to what one may call activist calls for rethinking the lack of representation or speaking about experiences of discrimination. However, feminist theory holds theoretical value in and of itself. It is not merely an activist tool, but it also permits us to see international law and the work it does in both the natural and the social world differently. And here I think you've made a brilliant contribution, not just in terms of showing us how this could be done, but also just in very carefully retracing some of the other feminist interventions that have come before you and that will surely come after you. So while I am tempted to speak about all the major themes of the book, I will limit myself to my own area of expertise, which is the natural environment, and the theorizing that you have done on international environmental law. So aligning with critical Marxist and post-colonial views, this book too identifies or asserts that international environmental law plays an active and significant role in converting nature into the natural environment of humankind and its exploitable resource. So the question then is, sorry, I've just lost my notes. There we go. So what you bring to the table here is that by applying post-human theory, you, unlike work that has come before you, not contribute to the feminization of nature to highlight the sort of victim role, but really challenge binary assumptions that structure international law altogether. So you invite us to break with binaries and instead rethink how the scales between the balance of human agency and the ways we then make sense of that agency in our legal relationships to the natural world could be rethought. You point to other types of literature that have thought about that, notably Earth Systems Law, but also more common approaches that have emerged, as Professor Otto has pointed out, as part of the rights of nature movement championed primarily by indigenous communities. For me, as an international lawyer, I am simply intrigued because what you are asking me to do is to nothing short of breaking with the fundamentals of, of the way that I think about law. And indeed, this raises question of how will I not only practice law, but also teach law to students. So what does your book do to our teaching of the theory of subjectivity? And what does your book, or what does your book do to how we understand human rights? And the idea of the relationship between rights of the human and rights of nature, and also the relationship between economic, social, ecological realm and the categorizations that that determine how these laws are structured to begin with. So many fundamental questions that even relate to how we speak about our discipline and how we structure our discipline into subfield. As Professor Otto said, that is a call to action, but it's also a call to what I would call more careful doctrinal work in this field, which I think is a really important aspect of your work. Because this is not just high theory that you're proposing, but indeed it is legal activism with and through law. And for that, I would like to thank you. So just to conclude, I think feminist theory and international law is not only a highly original contribution, but also a significant one, which I'm sure will shape or reshape our field for years and decades to come. Thank you very much. And I turn it over to Patricia.
Good evening, everyone. Good morning to Di and everyone joining us from the other side of the world. My name is Patricia, and I am honored to be here in such distinguished company. In this book launch, I am in charge of what we have called the Essex years. So to give you a little context to frame these comments, it was the year 2017 and I was overwhelmed. I work at Essex Law School, and one of the things that we do is human rights. We have one of the largest human rights faculty in the UK and in the world, and we run lots of different undergraduate and postgraduate human rights programs. And many of our postgraduate human rights students are on their way to advocacy positions or international organizations, or they're taking a break from burnout from advocacy and international organizations. And at the Human Rights Center, which is housed within the law school, we've got lots of different academics who specialize in lots of different things, all related to human rights. And we've all got too much work. I am an international human rights lawyer, and I specialize in women's rights and LGBTIQ+ rights. And until I met Emily, I was very much focused on how we can stretch and pull at human rights law to make it do what we need it to do, which, as some of you will know, can be maddening. So there I was in 2017, overworked, overwhelmed, and my head of department was telling me to hang in there as he was trying very hard to recruit someone who could relieve some of the pressure. So I hung in there until the day that he wrote to me to say that the school had made an offer to somebody that he was very excited about and that he hoped that she would accept in the following days. And I breathed a sigh of relief. And a few days later, I got an email that said that he was delighted to announce that, quote, Emily Jones joins us as lecturer with a focus on tort law and obligations. She has been a teaching associate at SOAS, where she will shortly complete her PhD on feminist cyborgs and gods, international law, humanism, and the limits of the global order. She grew up in Essex, was how that ended. So from that moment, in my mind, she was feminist cyborg. I recall that the first time that I engaged with her work was at a human rights research away day, where I distinctly recall feeling very inadequate because in her abstract, there were at least 7 words that I didn't know. Her presentation was fascinating, and I still remember it 5 years after the fact, which is saying a lot, given how many presentations have occurred in between and that I don't remember anything at all about. But I do remember this one. I remember that she talked about mushrooms, demonstrating reasoning, about trees practicing solidarity, and a river that had legal personality. And it was like being transported to another world where our efforts weren't constantly dominated by the fires that we were desperately trying to put out with the grossly inadequate tools that we had. Needless to say, I had never met anyone like Emily Jones. Right from the start, she had a massive impact on all of us. We finally had someone who could teach queer approaches and post-colonial approaches and post-human approaches, as well as tort, of course. Her interventions in teaching, in research, and in administrative meetings were simultaneously so polite and so radical, almost like the politeness meant that you didn't realize how radical the suggestion was until you'd agreed to it. She pulled us out of our comfort zones over and over again. I found an email in preparing this presentation. I found an email that she sent us in around 2020 that began, "Dear speculative humanities humans / redefined humans, beyond humanism, speculative humans, post-humans, a-humans, non-humans, kin, cyborgs, critters, and all others." She constantly pushed me to go beyond my comfort zone. And here are a selection of my comments on a piece of work that she asked me to give her feedback on. These are from the little comment bubbles in the margin that you write. So, is Trump a techno-capitalist just because he has a Twitter account? Is it bad that I'm instinctually okay with my hierarchy over machinic subjects? Before this sentence, I thought I had understood what you meant to say in this piece. Now I'm worried that I missed something. I think you shouldn't assume that your readers will know what an electronic person is. So it would be good if you included in the brackets after electronic person, something like the beings formerly known as robots or something like that. How can we criticize the straight white rich male bias of the law and then purport to use the law to make Mars different from Earth? Why should feminists write a constitution? Can't we come up with something else? We don't always get each other academically, but she has always been incredibly patient with me as I have grappled with the mushrooms and the cyborgs and the law. So, as I said, I'm honored to be here today to celebrate her and to celebrate this amazing book that she wrote. One of the themes that runs through the book is the tension between resistance to the law and compliance with the law that feminists have had to navigate. The tension between exposing the oppressive structures in law while at the same time using the law as a tool to alleviate suffering. This tension that one of our PhD students described to me as, quote, fuck law / engage with law dynamic. So one of the most beautiful ways in which Emily and I have explored this dynamic is through our teaching of LGBTIQ+ rights. So after the Pulse shooting in 2016, I asked permission to teach a module on the human rights of queer people. My proposal was initially approved, but until 2022, I didn't have enough available hours to teach it. And when I finally did, I asked Emily if she would co-teach with me. And what resulted was a classroom methodology that saw Emily and I embody the fuck law / engage with law dynamic. More often than not, she was the fuck law part and I was the engage with the law part. And both of us in dialogue illustrated to our students that it was okay to challenge the law and that it was also okay to use the law and to celebrate the small and complicated victories that the law affords us as queer people. It's a powerful teaching methodology. And now that Emily has moved to Newcastle, it's one that my PhD student Matteo Bassetti and I are attempting to replicate in class. Emily's influence has changed the way that I teach and the way that I research. She has pushed me to be more radical and less afraid. And now that she's left Essex, I feel the need to continue her radical influence here. Interestingly, I feel that the radicality will be the lesser of my struggles. I find being as polite and diplomatic as Emily will be much, much harder to do. Thank you. And with that, I will pass on to Professor Rosie Braidotti.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gina. Sorry about disappearing in the middle of the introduction, but it's just a good trick to make quite an entry when you come back in the middle. So remember that, everybody. Good trick. Emily, what an achievement. And all of you, how fantastic to see this mixture, great emotions and great reason at work, creativity and critique, love and lucid reasoning. It's so much. Also a testimonial to the impact that Dr. Jones has on all of us as scholars, as academics and humans and posthuman humanoids. Indeed, there is only one like this, plenty to deal with. So let's be happy that it is a unique sample in that respect. Landmark moment, looking forward to many more books, dear Dr. Jones, dear Emily. And some of you know that I have developed as a result of my cooperation to Emily a huge case of law envy. And I came in the picture rather late. I really honor my colleagues for having trained this remarkable scholar. I was only the external on her PhD examination, and we immediately developed quite a partnership in combining critique and creativity and combining the so what question. We philosophers are so happy when we get the questions right. We got a bottle of Prosecco. I got the right questions. Like, you know, well, with lawyers and legal thinkers, you know, as all of you have demonstrated, we need to land somewhere and be a little bit more grounded. And my law envy is a touch of envy for the pragmatism, the groundedness, and the dynamic nature of a field of studies, a discipline that actually engages with the present, actually can talk about non-human agents, can do that, and in some ways has to do that, is expected to engage with the present for the purpose of regulating or at least putting order into it. I think one of the longer lasting impacts of my collaboration with Emily has been probably a stronger need for concreteness, for so what. We have edited several books together, and we will continue. And I have engaged, she's been my head tutor for the summer school, and again, this will go on. It's been an amazing moment for me to rethink, to reconnect, and to ground myself. I have really questions for Emily, because I knew all of you will be conceptually very savvy. So I thought I'm going to be very practical and show that I have learned the lessons of pragmatism. There you go. Ha! If you expected me to talk about the posthuman, forget it. I've been there, done that. Now, I have questions, Emily, on methodology. And I know you can't answer because we would need 6 months. And I hope we do have time to develop this in seminars. But I do think, just as Patricia said, that you have developed a teaching methodology, I think that there is a research methodology, particularly in this book, which is the coming of age book, that is extremely striking. And for all of the hundreds of people out there who are using this book, and I remind you, please purchase it for purposes of training, that the work on method that Dr. Jones and Emily has put into this book is quite remarkable. And I will single out 2 areas of this methodology that I would like to simply ask questions for the future. Don't expect answers now. And the 2 issues are interdisciplinarity, and some of my colleagues, some of you have already mentioned it, and your own specific brand of empiricism. So if I can say quickly a few things about each of these. On interdisciplinarity, it is so central to your understanding of posthuman law that you almost take it for granted. But if you could take a step back and treat me like a first-year student, how and why is interdisciplinarity so central? And why is it so possible? Because it is both necessary and actually quite feasible. Try interdisciplinarity in philosophy sometime and see what happens to you and to your career. What does interdisciplinarity add to the critical legal theory framework? And is your understanding of posthuman legal theory inherently interdisciplinary? Or is it just one of the optional tools in your extremely diversified and very impressive, very erudite toolbox? It seems in some ways that there is something of an inherent interdisciplinarity, and I would love to draw that out and hear how you've crafted that, or how you've kind of grown to make it your tool. Related to this, a sub-question, the posthuman claims to be interdisciplinary, maybe transdisciplinary, post-disciplinary also to a certain extent, but it really operates within the humanities and the social sciences. Thanks to you, we can hope to operate in law, and you show how easy and how fantastically effective it is. So what do you think can be the specific contribution of the legal theory methodology to this rather limited and rather boisterous claim to interdisciplinarity by posthuman scholarship? And connected to this, that will be the last of my queries on the interdisciplinary method. What are the policy implications of this particular form of legal interdisciplinarity? Do you have any advice or any reflections? You know that we philosophers, all we think that we have all the policy recommendations. They're all abstract principles. We should all be equal. We should all be sure. But the policy side of this, again, the groundedness and the pragmatism of it. Fascinated by this. And I think there's something that you could dig deeper in here. My heart beats even faster when I think of empiricism, because an empirical method within humanities, social sciences, and critical theory is a real challenge. Again, the touch of envy, legal theory is both grounded and theoretically infused and pragmatic. You really have it all in some respects. And in your work, the actuality of the empirical and the priority of experience and the urgency of the present are really the key ideas. It's an empirical method framed by the actuality of what's happening to us, and the priority of experiences. These things are out there. So even if you don't like them, well, you can lump it, they are out there. And the urgency of the challenges. And they seem to me they are the key ideas in the kind of textual empiricism that you enact and play out in this book. And I'm wondering whether you recognize this or whether I am over-philosophizing you. Moreover, these features are not just practical, but also conceptual ways of avoiding the imprecisions of universalizing abstractions, avoiding transcendentalism and practicing the radical immanence, which is one of the concepts that we share. So could you explain a little bit more about the specific brand of textual and methodological empiricism? And let me give you some data about yourself. Your book is at 80,000 words, 204 pages, has a bibliography of 31 pages, an index of 7 pages with approximately 75 key terms per page, for a total of key terms around about 525 key concepts, a total number of footnotes amounting to 176. Hello, undergraduates out there, 176 footnotes. None of this is accidental or random. There is a system here. And I think one of your lessons is, and I really embrace what the previous panelists have said, the radicalism with excellence, the rigor with the daring. And I would love to really, also for the future, to hear a lot more about the specific rigor of your Posthuman methodology and what enormous fun it is to read as well. My compliments.